Hello all, and welcome to the channel. I'm Wafflehammer, and in this episode I'm going to be waffling on about the Warhammer 40,000 faction, the Imperial Guard, or as Games Workshop's copyright friendly strategy would have me call them, the Astra Militarum, Latin for Star Soldiers. Games Workshop sure does love their Latin. On the tabletop, the Imperial Guard, and no, we shan't be using Astra Militarum again, are very much a gunline army, composed of everything from mobile artillery to super heavy tanks, to armoured walkers and VTOL gunships, subhuman mutants and psychers. But the most common Imperial Guard unit or army composition is that of mass infantry platoons advancing alongside grinding World War I era looking tanks. An army that very much fits the Imperial Guard lore of massive expendable manpower and stolid, dependable armoured battalions. Though this is not to say it's the only way to play an Imperial Guard army. I myself have been toying with the idea of collecting a Sentinel Walker heavy force, just because I think the armoured Sentinel model is cool. Despite at the time of recording some slightly dated looking models, an Imperial Guard army can look amazing on the tabletop, with distinct camouflage patterns on tanks and a strong colour scheme and theme really bringing an army together. Additionally, the Imperial Guard are an army that kit bashes well, and this is actively encouraged by Games Workshop. So much so that the more recently released Genestealer Cults models were expressly designed with kit bashing with Imperial Guard models in mind. But what about the lore of the Imperial Guard? Well, for me personally, and for a lot of people who play Imperial Guard in 40k, this is where a significant factor of why you would collect this army comes in: relatability. In a setting of endless war, where there are factions of genetically engineered warriors, assorted aliens with strange and exotic weaponry, ancient societies from the dawn of history, horrors from beyond our galaxy, and actual, literal demons, an Imperial Guardsman is just a human. A human wearing a thin flak jacket, a too tight pair of boots and a too big helmet, clutching a lasgun and facing down all the horrors the galaxy has to offer with nothing but faith in the God Emperor and their fellow soldiers. They are who you and I would be in the grim darkness of the far future. GI average Joe, shitting a brick in a foxhole and holding the Imperium together through sheer grit and determination. The Imperial Guard are the principal fighting force of the Imperium of Man, a totalitarian, dictatorial regime controlled through the religious worship of the God Emperor of Mankind, a religion that teaches blind faith and hatred of anything other than the pure and divine human form, and is a colossal galaxy-spanning empire composed of millions of inhabited worlds and uncounted souls that is surrounded on all sides by deadly foes, fighting on thousands of war fronts simultaneously, fighting wars of faith, wars of expansion, wars of extermination, wars of survival without end. And this shapes the Imperial Guard's basic fighting doctrine of forcibly recruiting millions of poor bastards into a regiment and then throwing them into the meat grinder. And for this reason, the Guard are known as the Hammer of the Emperor, a blunt instrument. The origins of the Imperial Guard dates back to the days of the Great Crusade, when the God Emperor of Man was just the Emperor of Man, and was actually knocking about in the galaxy with his sons in air quotes, the Primarchs, and their sons, the Adeptus Astartes, the Space Marines. As the Great Crusade ground on, winning victory after victory, the elite Space Marine legions became more and more thinly spread. So worlds that had been conquered and pacified for long enough had regiments drawn from their populace, particularly if that planet had willfully joined the Imperium. And so, as the Imperium expanded, so too did its manpower, and the Imperial Army, as it was then known, was formed. At first, the Imperial Army merely garrisoned newly conquered planets to free up the Space Marine legions for more conquests. They basically kept an eye on planets to make sure they didn't immediately revert to their old ways as soon as the terrifying Space Marines had moved on. But as the Imperial Army swelled in numbers, from millions to billions of infantry, fighting battle tanks, and even armadas of spaceships, they played a more and more active role in wars of conquest. Though, in every theatre of war, the Imperial Army was always subservient to the Space Marines in all cases, receiving direct orders from the ranking Space Marine commander, and more generally from the Primarchs and the War Master Horus himself, leader of all Imperial military assets in the galaxy, second only to the Emperor. This whole arrangement turned out to be rather the fuck up by the Emperor, as this system relies on the loyalty of a few key figures, and particularly Horus, the War Master. And well, wouldn't you know it, sod's law, Horus only goes and gets corrupted by chaos and turns traitor, taking half of the other Primarchs and their legions with him and starting the Horus heresy. And the Imperial Army, due to their subservient role and a rather healthy dose of self-preservation instinct, broadly follow the example of whichever Space Marines they were following in whichever theatre of war, and join their Space Marine masters on that side in the conflict, adding billions of men, tanks, and more importantly ships to the traitors' sides. Once the dust settled and the traitors were ostensibly defeated, and the Emperor mortally wounded and placed on the golden throne of Earth, some reorganization was in order. As per the Codex Astartes, written by the loyalist Primarch Roboute Guilliman, I don't know how to say that friggin' name. The Space Marine legions were split into much smaller chapters, and the Imperial Army, as it was, ceased to exist. The fleet and army were separated, so that one individual couldn't control a force that could occupy a planet, becoming, respectively, the Imperial Navy and the Imperial Guard. The Imperial Guard were reorganized into planetary-sized units known as regimentos, again with the faux Latin, Games Workshop loves it, which were in turn divided into regiments. See, regimentos, regiments, I don't know, could have just used the same word for both. And it became common practice to create fighting forces combined from regiments from different worlds, whose fighting loyalty would be to the Imperium above all. And if one regiment should turn traitor, the other regiments, being soldiers from other worlds, would have little reason to join with them, and would have had little reason to fraternize with them in the first place and allow their corruption to infiltrate their unit. At the same time, commissars of the Officio Praefectus, again with the faux Latin, were introduced to guarantee loyalty and discipline, and are integrated at all levels of Imperial Guard command. A commissar is also not of the same world as his wards, and are often orphans raised in Imperial institutions for their ferocious loyalty, being from another planet, not following a regiment's traditions or doctrines. They stand apart as grim figures, always watching and assessing, and they have the right to execute you on the spot for perceived treason, cowardice, lack of proper enthusiasm, and religious zeal, as exemplified by this quote from the Imperial Guard Codex. "I care not from which worlds my soldiers are drawn, only that they serve with unflinching loyalty. It is their duty to fight and to die so that humanity may be preserved, and it is mine to see the enemy drowned in the blood of their sacrifice." Basically, if you want to use any other tactic than running at the enemy with a bayonet, your commissar will execute you. Try to fall back from an untenable position, your commissar will execute you. Show less than complete faith in the Imperium and the Emperor as a whole, your commissar will execute you. Weapon malfunction, your commissar will execute you. Shoelaces untied, your commissar will execute you. The interdependence of Imperial Guard regiments means any treacherous regiment cannot expand their treason beyond one world, and should a naval fleet mutiny, they won't have the ability to refit and resupply or deploy ground troops. Now you see, this seems like a halfway decent solution, but this is the grim darkness of the far future, and a simple, elegant system of governance is unheard of. The compartmentalization, really using the old vocabulary today, the compartmentalization of various military arms across the impossibly vast Imperium more often than not means requests for aid or reinforcement often go unheeded, get lost in processing, or are purposefully ignored to preserve one's own force, or for political bullshittery, or because sometimes, as a psychic plea for help is desperately sent into the void, a response never comes, as your planet has been lost in the vast data stacks of the monstrously large and inefficient and corrupt imperial bureaucracy, never to be rediscovered again, a lone outpost of humanity in the deep, dark reaches of space. And that brings us neatly to the Departamento Munitorum. The Departamento Munitorum is the military arm of the Adeptus Administratum, the imperial bureaucracy. Honestly, if you're going to get into 40k lore to any extent, these Latin words are just going to have to become second nature to you. And they form the general staff of the Imperial Guard, and it is shite, not fit for purpose at all. Organised at a sector and sub-sector level, the Munitorum has autonomy enough to react to local threats within their star systems, and considering the vagaries of warp travel and communication, this is essential, allowing smaller localized departments to react to threats in principle. In reality, all bureaucratic arms of the Imperium have too much power and are intertwined with religious dogma, technological regression, and strict adherence to a bloated and unwieldy bureaucratic process. Meaning a plea for military aid that is received, a triumph in itself, may not be acted on for months, years, or decades, as it wends its way through hundreds of adepts, filling out forms in triplicate before it can make its way to someone who can actively sanction a request. Someone sitting at a desk, light years away, safe and sound, and it is far from unheard of for an Imperial task force to arrive at a destination to find that the planet they were sent to defend was overrun centuries ago. Even worse, this monstrously unwieldy organisation is responsible for wrangling Imperial regiments of infantry, tanks, air support and the Imperial Navy together, as well as enough food, ammunition, boots, fuel, water, everything a fighting army needs. And whether due to incompetence, political manoeuvring, or fighting over resources, is not unheard of for some or all of these elements to be lost or withheld. The Departamento Munitorum even has the nerve to make themselves out to be selfless heroes, filling out forms so that the Imperium can function. So much so that an Imperial Guardsman shivering in a foxhole somewhere on some God Emperor forsaken front line may be given an Imperial propaganda leaflet telling him to give thanks to the selfless heroes of the Administratum, whose brave work saw him equipped with his lasgun and flak vest so that he may get a chance at martyrdom in the Emperor's name. Truly, the Departamento Munitorum is a hallowed institution, and if you say otherwise, your commissar will execute you. Now, let's assume the Departamento Munitorum does sometimes do its job, and found and equip some regiments for war. How would that look? Well, every Imperial planet is run by a planetary governor, and the Imperium cares not who this is or how they run their planet, only that the annual tithes, T-I-T-H-E-S, tithes, are paid. A governor must fund and equip a planetary defence force to guard that planet, and must supply the Imperium with that planet's principal resource and regular drafts of the population to make up regiments of Imperial Guard to fight elsewhere. However, the Imperium reserves the right to increase drafts at any time for any reason, usually because a planet is near a war zone. Again though, a governor can supply the requested manpower however they wish. After all, the Imperium is not after quality, they're after quantity. Some governors will supply from their planetary defence force as they are already trained, though some unscrupulous Imperial recruiters will simply come along and draft the cream of the crop of the planetary defence force and leave that planet woefully undefended, kind of defeating the point. It's also not unheard of for a planetary governor to simply hand over the planet's entire convict population to form penal regiments. Penal, P-E-N-A-L, not penile. That's right, they just arm their entire prison population. That surely won't go wrong, huh? And then they ship them off planet. So, if you're unlucky and you're in the Guard, you might find yourself serving alongside some real nasty, hardened criminals with nothing to lose. Some planets recruit from vicious gangs, barbaric warriors, or noble scions of important families, where serving in the Guard is seen as an honour, and so regiments serving alongside each other may have completely different uniforms, tactics, codes of conduct, and general outlook on life, ranking systems, everything. And whilst they will commonly speak low Gothic so as to be able to coordinate with other regiments, many will continue to speak exclusively their own tongue, their home language, unique to their world, and use it as a battle cant to aid in encrypting communications on the battlefield. Such diversity of fighting techniques is a strength of the Imperial Guard, and while many commanders view a guardsman as simply meat for the grinder, some rare officers and regiments make good use of their draftees' unique skills and doctrines. And so there are specialised regiments of light skirmishers, drop troops, city fighters, mechanised infantry, and double hard death world bastards, and more besides. It is the duty of the officers of these regiments to see that their soldiers make effective use of their principal strength, while simultaneously not deviating too far from the accepted imperial military template, and march forth to glorious victory or martyrdom in the name of the God Emperor of mankind. And if they don't, their commissars will execute them. An imperial governor must see to it that the annual tithe of roughly 10% of their planet's fighting population is ready and of acceptable quality. If it is, then all good, and they can go back to another year of corruption and hookers and blow, politician stuff. If, however, the tithe is of unacceptable quality, then the governor's life is forfeit, and an example will be made, and a new governor installed. And so, it's one of the few duties taken very seriously by the noble governors. The tithing of Imperial Guard regiments also looks very different across the different worlds of the Imperium. A sparsely populated agri-world, for example, may only raise a few 100,000 guardsmen and cavalry, whereas a hive world, where the populace is many billions and often heavily industrialized, will raise millions of guardsmen and armoured vehicles from its factories to satisfy its tithing parameters. Upon founding, a regiment will simply take the name of its home world, followed by a number, because the Imperium is a very if it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of system. So, for example, the 100th Regiment, drawn from the world of Cadia, would be the Cadian 100th Regiment. Nice and simple. A regiment typically has a strength of several thousand soldiers, but this number can vary enormously, with some infantry regiments numbering hundreds of thousands, and some super heavy tank crews only numbering a dozen. The Departamento Militarum holds that despite a regiment's numbers, armoured composition or specialisation, that one regiment is as effective as any other and no different, and may in the Imperium's far past started out as a gross oversimplification, necessary due to the Imperium's vast scale, but this has since conjoined with religious dogma that make questioning of the Departamento Militarum's hallowed pen-pushing heroes tantamount to heresy. After all, the department is divinely ordained by the administratum and the ecclesiarchy, who are in turn ordained by the High Lords of Terror, who have personally been chosen by the God Emperor of mankind. And so, the entire bureaucratic chain, from top to bottom, is divinely ordained and cannot be questioned. All this means that it's all too common for expert jungle fighters to be deployed to a war-torn city, and single super heavy tank regiment to be sent to a jungle world without infantry support, or drop troops sent to a planet without air support or air transport and forced to walk. After all, one regiment is the same as any other, and if you question that, your commissar will execute you. The Imperial Guard is known as the Hammer of the Emperor, as it makes prodigious use of colossal, brutal firepower, and a fight-to-the-death credo revolving around a violent religion and limitless manpower. And this informs the Imperium's wider strategy. If a planet is invaded and its planetary defense force overcome, the first response is always to send in the Guard, and nearby worlds will see their tithes increased. And if the enemy continues to push, then the sphere around the conflict zone is pushed wider, drafting more tithed regiments from further and further away. And so, the harder a foe attacks the Imperium, the greater its response will be. And like the nickname Hammer of the Emperor implies, the Guard are a blunt, heavy instrument, slamming again and again into the enemy until they are pounded flat. This is not to say that the Imperial Guard is entirely without nuance and tactical prowess. There are those chosen to become officers, either through luck, merit, or because they hail from their planet's nobility, and they must study the Tactica Imperium, a tome which contains everything from war treatises and grand strategy, tactical ploys from great heroes of the past, to the optimal way to deploy wildly different but interdependent allied regiments on a sector-wide scale, and even snippets of the direct works and memoirs of heroes of legend, like Lord Solar Macarius. The Tactica Imperium also places emphasis on making maximum use of more specialized or more exotic elements of the Imperial Guard or its seconded allied forces and supporting staff. Now, get ready for this. Games Workshop loves using Latin or faux Latin in an attempt to make their intellectual property more copyright friendly, and the following are particularly egregious. There's the Adeptus Ministorum, the Ecclesiarchy, the Church, mostly there to minister to the spiritual needs of those soon to be martyred, and the Guard need it. Some of the horrors of the 41st millennium and sanity-blasting battlefields and apocalyptic spectacle more than take their toll. Not to mention being shipped through the hell dimension of the warp to reach any damned destination, risking mutation and demonic possession. Well, a bit of holy water and your nightly prayers will take care of that. The priests are essential. Many a newly founded regiment has found itself pressed into the cramped confines of a troop transport, surrounded by other strange and difficult to understand regiments, to sail across the perilous sea of stars, should they know not where, and never see their families again. And at times like that, a humble guardsman will cling to his faith like a drowning man to driftwood, and the priests are there to stoke that faith into a righteous rage directed at the foe, and to weed out those whose faith is not sufficiently zealous. As this quote from the Imperial Guard Codex shows us, there are those who raise their voices in anguish and sorrow for the plight of mankind. Such faithless folk wail of an end to all days, of a final damnation for us all. I say to you, those fools are wrong. Liars, I name them, heretics and sayers of doom. Listen not to such heathens, my brothers, for these are glorious days. Rejoice, for all may stand and fight for a truly righteous cause, and any man, no matter how humble, can earn everlasting glory through martyrdom in the Emperor's sight. What a quote, eh? Then we have the Adeptus Mechanicus, a transhuman mechaphile religious cult that worships the machine god, the Omnissiah, an aspect of the God Emperor of mankind, and whose only duty when attached to the Imperial Guard is the care and maintenance of the Omnissiah's bounty, the weapons and machines of the Imperial Guard. The Imperium and Mechanicus are technologically regressive, and the knowledge and means to make certain machines and technology are lost. With every planet or forge world overrun, another holy machine's means of production is forever lost. Even functioning examples of mass-produced machines aren't fully comprehended, and only the Mechanicus's holy ministrations keep things functioning. And it is for this reason their religious deviance is overlooked, as they make all of your weapons of war, and without them you're back to resorting to spears. The Mechanicus revere technology so much that they voluntarily replace their organic body parts over time, and the higher up in the Mechanicus an individual is, the more advanced of a cyborg they will invariably be. On the subject of tech priests, there's a nice little quote in the Imperial Guard Codex that goes, "For every unsettling sight the galaxy paraded before my eyes, still some of the strangest came from within our own ranks. Take the tech priest for one, all glowing eyes and waving cables, nests of wires and wasted flesh. To think that any man might choose to do that to himself voluntarily, it fair sets my teeth on edge. And they're secretive too, always removed, always aloof. Dealing with them was tougher than getting a bile tick off your boot. Yet for all that, my boys wouldn't have lasted a day in the field without the red robes, getting engines running again, fixing up weapon systems, calming angry machine spirits. They'd walk through fire to save one of their precious tanks, those tech priests, even if they couldn't care less about the men inside." Next is the Militarum Auxilia, known as abhumans. One of the three pillars of the Imperial faith is hatred of the mutant. As the line goes, abhor the alien, the mutant, and the heretic. But abhumans fall into an ever so slightly different category. When humanity first set out into the sea of stars, some planets were settled with diverse environmental and gravitational conditions that led to their populations devolving or evolving into something else. After the long age of strife, as the Imperium began making contact with the scattered human colonists, entire populations had deviated from the perfect human form. Some were so freakish or violent or pathetic that it was deemed that swift and total eradication was the only deserved response. But there were some exceptions to this rule, principally two in the Imperial Guard. The diminutive rattlings, small, keen-eyed snipers, they are both loved and hated by other guardsmen for their ability to find additional gear, exotic weapons, moonshine, and Emperor knows what else, often setting up their own black markets wherever they are deployed. And veteran guardsmen know to keep the diminutive little snipers on their side, for their discounts as much as for their overwatch fire. The other abhuman mutants allowed to serve are the Ogrins. Bullish, lumbering, 10-foot tall mutants from high gravity worlds. They aren't the most intelligent. In fact, far from it. But they are loyal to a fault and make excellent bodyguards. Their equipment must be rugged and simple, much like the Ogryns themselves, as anything in arm's reach is likely to see use as an improvised club. And their guns are fitted with burst limiters to stop them firing endlessly, as 30 seconds of noisy fun can leave them out of ammunition. Despite this, they do make good shock troops, as they follow orders with enthusiasm, particularly if it's from an officer they consider a friend, and usually only their officer friend can convince them to get into a Chimera APC, as Ogryns aren't fans of tight spaces or the dark. In both cases, the abhumans are allowed to serve only through merit alone and with much distaste, and as part of the Imperial indoctrination are taught that they must repent through battle for the sin of their birth, for the sin of their existence. Poor buggers. Next is the Scholastica Psychana, Psychic School. There are some weapons so powerful, so insidious, and terrifyingly effective that their usefulness outweighs their moral repugnance. The human mutation known as the psychogene is what allows the Imperium to function. Only psychers can send messages through the warp and guide ships through that unfathomable inimical realm. But a psyker, even a sanctioned one, is an unstable weapon, and every single time they open their mind to the warp to draw on their powers, their soul becomes like a flare, drawing all manner of warp entities and demons to them, risking fates worse than death, and commissars watch ceaselessly for any sign of loss of control, which isn't ideal when you need to really center yourself and stay calm to focus on using your mental powers, and you have some big brooding bastard stood behind you in a black trench coat clutching a pistol just waiting for an excuse to blow your head off, is it? And he will not hesitate to end a psyker's life with a high caliber explosive bolt round to the skull, which even for the psyker is preferable to demonic possession. Seriously, the tabletop rule for a commissar executing a psyker is called "It's for your own good." Now, where was I? Oh yeah, the Scholastica Psychana, basically psyker school. They supply battle psychers to counter enemy sorcery and witchcraft. Even if the sanctioned psychers perform well, the guardsmen will only ever view them with superstitious dread, if not outright hatred, and will make warding gestures when they walk past, and never look into a psyker's eyes in case he steals your soul or reads your mind and sees the contents of your homework folder. And lastly, we come to the Scholar Progenium. Now, as the name would suggest, the Scholar Progenium tutors and raises orphans from all over the galaxy, whose parents died meritoriously enough that the Imperium should bother to take care of their sproglings. And daughters will be shipped off to join the Adepta Sororitas, the old nuns with guns, although some exceptional sons or daughters can end up in the Ecclesiarchy Administratum or even Inquisition. But lads mostly end up being commissars of the Officio Prefectus, if they are arseholes, and those who are born fighters are inducted into, and wait for this faux Latin, Militarum Tempestus Scions. Trademark. The Militarum Tempestus Scions, and no, I shan't be saying the full name anymore, are an elite fighting force. They have thicker and better carapace armour and fancy hotshot lasguns, and special weapons are given in preference to the Scions over ordinary guardsmen, as their advanced training and elite status means they'll put them to better use. This is a double-edged sword, however, as this means they are often called upon to undertake the most dangerous missions around. The Scions briefly had their own codex, but were folded back into the Imperial Guard codex as they didn't have much of a range, and were only replacements for the much less trademark-friendly stormtroopers, absolute chads that they were. On a personal note, I don't know why, but I imagine young Scions joining up and a sergeant screaming into the lad's face, "The Eldar killed your dad, are you mad?" "Yes, Sergeant, I'm mad." "You don't sound mad." "I'm mad, Sergeant." "Well, what are you going to do about it?" "I'm going to kill them all, Sergeant." "Show me a war face." Ah! But I tell you what, I've gone and gotten distracted and lost my way. Talk about Death Strike missile launchers, Scout Sentinels, super heavy tanks, Valkyrie airborne assault carriers, but the iconic unit of the Imperial Guard, the backbone of the entire Imperium, is the trillions of normal, everyday guardsmen clutching the humble lasgun. The lasgun is disproportionately important in understanding the 40k setting, because the fandom refers to lasguns as flashlights, and that they are as strong as flicking a flashlight on and off at the enemy. And rules wise, that is spot on. It's one of the weakest weapons in the game. But in the lore, well, lasguns are easy to manufacture, enough to arm every last guardsman. Their power packs have around 150 shots per charge, passively recharge when not in use. If they need to be charged ASAP, they can be charged from a socket or chucked into a campfire. Reliability? A non-issue. After being fully submerged in water, they can immediately be fired again. If completely submerged in thick mud, just pop a finger down the muzzle, drag some of that out, and you're all good, ready to roll. It can fire semi-automatic or full auto, doesn't have to adjust for windage, shots travel at the speed of light after all, and can leave a 1 meter crater in solid concrete. It is that good, and it is the weakest weapon. Nah, it's one hell of a flashlight. It's just that in 40k, there's much crazier weapons out there. If you are recruited into the Guard, the only way out, other than death in battle, is if your regiment performs so well in conquering a planet that is awarded custodianship over that planet. The officers of the regiment invariably become the new ruling class and incredibly wealthy, and the dog soldiers become the new middle class, and the commander, well, he becomes the new governor, and they live the rest of their lives in wealthy retirement to a man. Or rather, that's the dream. In actuality, it's incredibly rare, and is more like the slim glimmer of hope that keeps soldiers slogging on through war zone after war zone, if they are favoured by fortune, as the regiment is whittled down by all the terrors of a hostile galaxy, despite being reinforced or combined with other understrength regiments. The veteran core of original foundees look out at the faces of the younger recruits, their hollow-eyed stares unblinking, because they know there's no end, no way out, just hundreds of war fronts across the galaxy needing meat for the grinder, and the realization that the lucky ones were the ones who caught a bullet and died quickly years ago. And on that note, thanks for listening to me waffle on. If you liked this video, please like and subscribe for more. And if you didn't, then no bother. Till next time, ta-ra.